And when the deer disappeared, I said, oh my God, what a story. My brother said, you know, if you ever tell this one again, no one will ever believe you. Now, last month, my brother and I went on a hike. It was beautiful weather for November. It wasn't too cold. And the leaves had all fallen from the trees and dried out, so that as we walked, our footsteps sounded like ksh, 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 ksh. We set out from the cars on Saturday morning with oatmeal in our bellies and full backpacks on our back, and we walked 12 miles. In the evening, we set up our camp next to a creek, and we gathered enough wood for a really nice fire, set up our tent, and it got dark pretty early. So we sat on a pair of stumps as the darkness gathered around us, and we were about halfway through a fifth of rye whiskey when we heard the call. Did you hear that? I asked my brother. Yeah, he said. It had sounded like a yell, hoarse and abrupt. And we stood up from our stumps, and we listened, and we listened, and there it was again. And my brother said, that sounded like help to me. And I thought so too. So now we walked away from the fire, walked away into the darkness, facing the darkness, listening and listening, and one more time, unmistakable help, we heard. So I said, well, that's it. Come on. We need cell phones. We need water bottles. We need flashlights. Let's do this. This is it. And my brother said, we can't go out there. I said, what do you mean? Didn't you hear them? They just called for help. And he said, it's dark. We're drunk. The call is coming from across the hollow. If we go out there, there is no way we're going to find our way back to our campsite. We can't go out there. So what are we supposed to do? I said. So he put his hands around his mouth and he called out, are you okay? His call died without echoing. Come on, Rob, I said. This is Boy Scout shit. 3 distress calls. We got to go out there. He said, look, if we go out there, there's going to be 3 injured people and not 1. He called again. Are you okay? And the woods, which had seemed so friendly when we were sitting on our stumps and drinking our whiskey, now felt macabre and skeletal. It was cold there away from the fire, and eventually my brother sat back down on his stump and he said, look, either they figured it out or they bled out. And either way, it's not our problem. We can't go out there if they're not responding to us. We can't go out there. I looked out at the darkness. So I tried calling. I said, did you call for help? My brother said, don't say that. All they're going to hear is help. You're going to make this worse. Okay. Are you okay? I called. And this time, there was a response. It was closer. It was quieter. It came from behind us. And when we turned to look, there, just inside the light of our campfire, was the deer. It was a buck with 3 points on a dinky rack. It had gray-brown fur and it was bleeding from a wound on its right foreleg. Somehow we weren't startled when we saw it. We were only startled when it spoke to us. Help. Holy shit, said my brother. Holy shit, right. My brother had the whiskey bottle in his hand and he looked at it, looked at the deer and set it very carefully on the ground. Please help me, said the deer. And you may be astonished to hear how quickly my brother and I got over the fact that standing before us was a talking deer. But all I can say is that we both spent a lot of time in the woods. And if you have too, you'll know that when it gets dark and the only light is the campfire and the starlight, things can get real weird real fast. And it's best to just go with it. So instead of questioning our sanity or wondering what a shared hallucination might mean or wondering what some terrible mistake some schmuck at the whiskey distillery had made. Instead, my brother and I looked at it and we said, okay. Now, the deer was being chased by a hunter, hence the wound on its foreleg. My brother looked at the wound and the bullet had passed cleanly through. The deer would be okay, except that it was still being pursued by that hunter. So I asked the deer to tell us what the hunter had looked like. The deer said, "He shot me at dusk. He wore all orange. I felt his shot before I heard it. If he had a face, I didn't see it. He was following me close behind at first, but then it got dark and I think I stopped bleeding, and he's been further behind since. But I get the feeling that he won't stop, that he can't stop." My brother said, "It sounds like a metaphor." And the talking deer said, "What's the metaphor?" So my brother got a jacket out of the bottom of his backpack, and we pulled up a stump for the deer, and we put the jacket on the deer. And I got a pair of flannel PJs out of the bottom of my sleeping bag, and we put them on the deer, and we duct taped a cup to its uninjured foreleg. And then there were its antlers. And I said, "We gotta cut them off." And the deer said, "But it's hunting season, but it's mating season." And I said, "Yeah, but it's also hunting." So my brother had a little saw blade on his Swiss Army knife, and he cut through the first antler, and he was about 3/4 of the way, the second antler, when we heard ksh, 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 approaching footsteps. And so my brother snapped off the second antler, and he threw them both in the tent, and I poured the hood of the jacket, pulled it over the head of the deer. And just as my brother sat back down on the stump, the hunter came into our campfire light. He had a rifle over his shoulder. He was wearing an orange jacket and an orange cap. He was enormous. "Evening," I said. The hunter nodded. Or he seemed to nod. Our campfire light was dim and wavery, and I couldn't quite make out his face, but he definitely had a face. I mean, he must have had a face. "Looking for a deer," the hunter said. "Have you seen one?" "Nope," said my brother. "This deer, I've been chasing it all day. I shot it in the foreleg. I thought it might have been drawn to your fire." "A deer drawn to the fire?" I said. "This was a weird deer." "Well, we haven't seen any deer at all the past 2 days," I said. "We really haven't seen any wildlife at all to speak of." "Yeah," my brother said, "not even flies." "Yeah," I said, "we haven't seen any flies at all." The deer looked at each of us in turn, or again, he seemed to. The firelight just wasn't very bright. He shifted the rifle on his shoulder, and he said, "That's an awfully small tent you got there for 3. My brother said, "Oh, well, you see, it's cold. It's real cold. And our father always says that whenever you've got a cold night, you need a small tent so that you can actually heat it up. You got a big tent, you'll just never heat it up." For what it's worth, my father has never said such thing. I said, "This is my little brother, but you would think that means that whenever there's 3 of us in a tent, that I would be the biggest spoon. But somehow, when all of us are in the tent and we're making spoons, I always end up as the littlest spoon, as the dollop of sour cream, if you will." I said, "Yeah, it's the egg on the spoon." I said, "Yeah, the egg on the spoon." He said, "Yeah, whenever you're running an egg race and you got your egg on your spoon, you're like the littlest spoon. You're like the egg on the spoon." And the hunter said, "Your friend doesn't talk much, does he?" And all of us looked at the deer. The deer said, "Sorry, mister. I guess I'm a little drunk." He took that cup back, and he tilted it as if to pour stuff out, but of course nothing came out. Grabbed the bottle of whiskey and he extended it to the hunter. He said, "Hey, you want to pull?" And the hunter said, "You all have a good evening." And then he off into the darkness. When his steps had faded to an audible, we took the jacket off the deer. My brother did his best job of duct taping the antlers back to his head. The deer thanked us, astonishingly quietly, into the night in the exact opposite direction that the hunter had gone. And when the deer disappeared, I said, "Oh my God, what a story." My brother said, "If you ever tell this one again, no one will ever believe you." And I told him that wasn't really up to him. And I was right, because, really, that's up to you.
Hear Karl Smith live on October 19th. Go to tell2023.eventcombo.com.